Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My apologies for signing in a little bit late, trying to get all this techno and other stuff together. How is everybody today? You'd rather be somewhere else?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
I'm fine, all things considered.
Well, thanks, sir.
Wonderful. All right. Now, unfortunately, the Institute did not give me a class list, so I'm going to be winging it a little bit. So just bear with me for a few minutes while I do a little bit of housekeeping so I can get something of a register together. All right, the first name that I see is Lanil, is it? Is that Lanil Williams?
You've done this before, Mr. Wilkinson. It's Linnell, L-A capital N-E-L-L. No I.
Oh, we did this before. Doggone it. I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, so here I am again. Okay, Linnell, can you do that again?
L-A capital N-E-L-L.
Linnell, okay. Is
Yes.
that Williams?
Williams hyphen Astwood.
Okay, Williams Astwood. Thank you so much, Linnell, for that little refresher. Okay, Chanel Neely, yes?
Yes, Mr. Wilkinson, that's me. Good evening.
Good evening, Chanel Neely. The last time we spoke was way back when. Anybody remembers?
In March.
In March, yes. Our time flies. Now we're almost in June. All right. Cindy Newbold, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good evening. I'm here.
Good evening. Lovely. Kendra.
Good night, Kendira. I'm here.
Indira.
Yeah.
Kendira.
Kendera.
ERA. Okay. Indira, what's your surname again?
Ferguson.
Ferguson, yes. Okay. Good afternoon, Kendira. And then who else? Danielle?
Yes, Danielle Newbold.
Danielle, D-A-N.
2 N's, I-E-L-L-E.
L. Newbold, yes.
Yes.
Are you related to Cindy?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Just checking. All right, let's see. Who else I'm not? Siobhan.
Good evening. Hello.
Hey, Siobhan, how are you?
Hello.
Okay, Siobhan Smith, yes. Nikita. Kita.
Nikita. Hi, good evening.
Evening, Nikita. Nikita Isaacs. LaTroy.
Good evening, sir.
LaTroy, how are you? Bodie.
All is well, and yourself?
I'm just fine, LaTroy. The only other Bodie I remember at the moment is Auckland Bodie. Any relationship?
No, sir. That's Exoma, buddy.
I think Suma Bodie. Okay. The prosecution rests. Way to go. Okay. Kobe, is that? Kobe?
Akobe.
Akobe.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Akobe. Kobe, what's your surname again?
Cumberbatch.
Cumberbatch, yes. See, great. Did I get everybody's name? Did I miss anybody? All right, perfect. So I have Rel, Chanel, Cindy Newbold, Kendra, Danielle, Siobhan, Nikita, Troy, and Kobe. All right, folks, thank you very much. Welcome. Sherry
There's
Nixon.
one more, Mr. Wilkinson, sorry to introduce one more person, Shari Nixon.
Okay, Sherry. Great, great, Sherry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
HAR, Sherry Nixon. Sherry, is that Nixon from Exuma?
Yes, sir.
My. It's a small world indeed.
Yes, it is.
All right, welcome back. Okay,
Thank you.
so thank you very much for giving me that update. It's amazing how quickly time passes. It seems like a million years ago when we did that review. Did you all get your papers in on time? Okay. Has anybody gotten any grades back yet for the paper?
Yes, sir.
Are you satisfied with your grades, everybody? Yes, no?
I am, yes, sir.
Anybody dissatisfied with what they got? I suppose silence means we're all satisfied. All right, that's fantastic. Because from what I'm looking at here, we have another assignment that we'll be discussing, assignment number 3, but that will happen probably in our last session somewhere down on June 23rd. The first 3 sessions will be primarily to discuss what we call situations and cases. Has anybody read Unit 6 yet at all? Looked at it, even blinked at it? No? All right, well, that's okay. We will spend a couple of weeks talking about situations and cases. It's kind of the final unit, I believe, in your GRC series. And hopefully it's designed to kind of look at all of the things you've been looking at before and to get you ready, hopefully, for your final bit of work. Any questions about anything at this stage before I go forward? Anyone? Anybody has any concerns? No? So I'm going to assume that means that everything is going basically well. Can somebody just kind of update me perhaps on some of the topical issues that you've discussed up to this point? Give me some idea. Anyone? Can you still hear me?
Mr. Wilkinson, can you repeat your question, please?
Yeah, can somebody just give me some idea of some of the topical issues that you discussed leading up to Unit 6? Anything that you can recall, any issues, discussions, topics from previous units? Doesn't have to be perfect, just let things fall out of your mouth. Doesn't matter how it falls out. Just throw out some stuff. Anyone? Chanel, I see your name popped up. Shari from Exuma, can you think of anything that you guys discussed prior to Unit 6?
Regulatory compliance.
Okay, regulatory compliance. Okay, that's a start. Thank you, Kendra, for getting the ball rolling. Anybody else can think of anything? She's gotten the ball rolling. Regulatory compliance.
Risk assessment.
Yes, risk assessment, which usually is a very small component of the risk management process, but a very important component. Because risk management involves all kinds of issues, and risk assessment happens to be one of the key steps. Okay. When we talk about regulatory compliance, what are we talking about? What are we talking about when we talk about regulatory compliance? What do we mean? I don't want a textbook answer. I just want you to throw out your thoughts.
When we think of regulatory compliance, oh,
Yeah, regulatory compliance.
Go ahead, Chanel.
Go ahead, Chanel.
regulatory compliance would entail registrants and licensees being compliant from a regulatory standpoint, specifically ensuring that there is training and education of personnel. And just another, can you hear me, Mr. Wilkinson?
I absolutely can hear you. Keep going.
Okay, so which it encompasses training and education of staff. It also incorporates a compliance function, ensuring that there is a robust environment within firms.
Okay, that sounds very good. That's kind of an excellent jump off point, because basically regulatory compliance does have to do with making sure licensees and organizations that are named as financial institutions, which these days includes credit unions and professionals and real estate people and all these other people have now been brought into the financial services sector in terms of their regulatory responsibilities. And yes, making sure that these financial institutions are deemed financial institutions are carrying out the policies and procedures as required by law and of course by the regulators themselves. One of the primary reasons why regulators are constantly going into organizations and doing compliance checks to make sure that organizations are following through with the anti-money laundering, KYC issues, terrorist financing issues, and basically following the rules of law and regulations. Who are some of our key regulators? Anybody remembers any of them? Who are some of our key regulators who are responsible for regulatory compliance?
Central Bank.
Yeah, Central Bank of the Bahamas, one of the, if not the main perpetrator.
Securities Commission of the Bahamas.
Yeah, Securities Commission of the Bahamas, by all means, is another perpetrator. Those of us who work in financial institutions and who consider ourselves to be licensees, we have to work with regulators, we meaning those who work in those organizations, but they don't necessarily like to see them. Whenever the regulators are coming, everybody is not happy and they're happy to see them leave. So yeah, the Central Bank, the Securities Commission. Do we have any other regulators in the Bahamas?
The Compliance Commission.
Yeah, the Compliance Commission, yes.
The Insurance Commission of the Bahamas.
Absolutely, the Insurance Commission of the Bahamas. Any others? Those are certainly the key ones. All right, those are certainly the key ones. Let me ask you another question. Has anybody ever heard of the FIU?
Yeah.
Okay, what have you heard?
It pertains to the Financial Intelligence Unit.
Well,
They're responsible.
Yeah, it means Financial Intelligence Unit. And what do they do?
They're responsible for ensuring that also registers are compliant, and they also, particularly their Their focus has to do with the invoking of sanctions or fines for registrants that are not compliant. They also provide approval of compliance officers, ensuring that the prerequisite matriculation and qualifications are met.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, thank you very much for that little insight into the FIU. Interestingly enough, there are still a lot of persons who are not very familiar with the FIU and what they actually do. Any MLROs in the room? Present or former? Anybody in this class has ever been an MLRO? No? Does anybody know what MLRO means?
Money laundering reporting officer.
Indeed. Have you seen that acronym before Unit 6 at any time in your studies?
Certainly, when we did.
Certainly, that's what I wanted to hear. No doubt we saw that acronym. And what were you told is basically the responsibility of the MLRO? First of all, is it an important job?
It's not only an important job, but it's a mandatory job.
Absolutely. We have legislation in place that makes it mandatory for all financial institutions or those deemed to be to appoint an MLRO. What is their basic function? Anybody knows? Remembers? Well, their primary job, in addition to assisting the organization with their AML, CFT issues, counter-financing of terrorism, money, anti-money laundering issues, is to spearhead the suspicious transactions reporting process. Anybody ever heard that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're getting warm. So it's the MLO's job to receive suspicious transactions reports from persons in the organization who believe that they have come upon a suspicious transaction. If they believe they've come upon a suspicious transaction, the first thing they need to do is to find the MLRO and file a report with the MLRO. And the MLRO will in turn file a report, all things being equal, if the report has any substance, with the FIU for further investigation. And of course, once the FIU gets the information from the financial institution through a strategic transaction report, then the FIU will conduct its analysis and so on and file some kind of result based on the outcome. So that's primarily what the MLRO's job is. Of course, in some organizations, the MLRO is very much involved in other compliance issues. But again, that depends on whether or not the organization has a separate person who's acting as a compliance officer or one person who's acting a dual role as compliance officer and MLRO. Right? So that's a little background into the job of the MLRO. Of course, whether you're in compliance or MLRO, I hope that you know by now that those jobs should be held by senior persons within the organizations who can wave some influence over the organization. And primarily they should be reporting first and foremost to the board of directors for the most part, and in some instances to both senior management and the board. The reason for this is that compliance and MLRO persons need to be in a position where they're deemed to be independent, and so that other parts of the organization cannot influence their decisions when it comes to money laundering, terrorist financing, and suspicious transactions reporting. All right, so that's a little background there since it came up. Nice thing to know in case one day you become a CO or an MLRO. All right, somebody said something about risk assessment. Who was that, Akobe, or was that Akobe or LaTroy?
Akobe.
Okay, Akobe, when you said risk assessment, what did you have in mind?
yes, assessing the risk factor in the activities and other processes that your institution may take part in, and the effect that they may have on the company.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, every financial institution should and is required to do a risk assessment, a full risk assessment of the organizations to determine whether or not there are any risky products, risky employees, or risky anything else, risky board of director members, risky senior management people, any kind of risks, liquidity risk, credit risk, whatever it is in the organization. They're required to do an assessment to find out what the level of exposure is with regards to their organization. Can anybody think of, right off the top of their heads, an area in your organization that might be considered a risk area? As an example?
Customers.
Yeah, certain customers. Absolutely. If you're in private banking, for example, or even in domestic banking, you might have some shady customers who are doing some spooky things. They have money being wired in from all over the place in major chunks dropping into your account. And if you're not doing the proper KYC and due diligence, you're going to find yourself with some suspicious looking transactions that could cause your organization to end up in major problems down the road. So yeah, it is important that financial institutions of all kinds do their due diligence, screen their customers. Customers are a major source of risk. Good customers are never a source of risk. Those persons who follow the rules, answer our questions, do not do spooky stuff, and pretty much provide us with the documentation information we need, generally we can work with them. But the other guys who refuse to do any of those things or even try to cooperate with the requirements, they are probably going to create some problems for your organization. So when you see them, you have a decision to make. Should you take them on as customers at all? Or should you do what some other organizations are doing? They take them on because they quote unquote need the business, want the business, crave the business, whatever it is. And then when things start to go badly, they panic and start doing weird stuff. Okay? Including sending interesting STRs to the FIU to help them solve a problem that they should have solved before the money or the transaction was completed. Right? So something to think about. And all of that comes out of somebody's point about risk assessment and somebody's suggestion that yes, the customer is a major source of risk. What about products? Is there a product that a financial institution can offer that can create risk for them? Anybody can think of a product? Any product that you're offering that can create some kind of risk for you in the future? Anyone in your organization or any other organization?
Wire transfers.
Wire transfers, yes, Kendira, absolutely. Why do you say that? In fact, wire transfers are a major source of product problems for many, many, many financial institutions. Even as we speak, people continue to send out spooky wire transfers for some reason and even receive them without even asking the basic questions for some reason. So, Kendira, why do you say wire transfers? You're right. Why is that?
Because it includes customers transferring money across borders, and it could be the proceeds of crime if you're not carefully monitoring those transactions.
Absolutely. It could be the proceeds of crime, of all kinds of crime. I hope by now that in your previous discussions during this course that you have run into the different kinds of criminal activity that can result from money laundering and terrorist financing, and all the proceeds of crime that can come from human trafficking, drug trafficking, and all these other stuff that predicate crimes come out of money laundering issues. So yes, be careful what product you offer, and you have to make sure, if you're in financial services, for example, that you do not allow your organization to be used, your products, for example, to be used by unscrupulous customers trying to get money into the system to clean it up or otherwise create some other havoc. So yeah, whoever came up with the risk assessment issue, you're absolutely right. And believe it or not, of course, risk does not stop just there. There's a whole laundry list of risk issues that we encounter all the time. It is the organization's responsibility, though, to recognize what they are for specific organizations and then do something about it. That's the point. All right. Next question. What does GRC mean? You cannot finish this course without just blurting that out. What is GRC? What does that mean?
Governance, risk, and compliance.
Wonderful. Wonderful. If you feel redundant saying it like, you all know that, that's fine. The more redundant it is, that means you're very familiar, and that's a good thing. Okay? And I think essentially this whole program, or this part of the program, is designed to look at governance issues, risk issues, and compliance issues. All right. Has anybody ever heard about a culture of compliance in this course or anywhere else?
Yeah, the culture starts at the top.
Aha, which means what?
From the board, come down,
Yeah, what should the board be doing?
generating the culture to ensure that everybody else act in a way that they know they're making sure that they're compliant, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, point well taken. It's a good start. The board should be doing the right and proper things at the top so that everybody down the line who is watching, those people that we call employees at all levels, are satisfied that the board is acting above board. Truth of the matter is, if you cannot trust the board, then you can be sure that at some point in the future, your organization will be in jeopardy in one form or another. As we've seen many times, many organizations have been fined millions and millions and millions of dollars because boards did not take the proper steps to deal with AML, CFT, and other issues. Boards have refused to sanction even the most fundamental compliance requirements by regulators. Regulators have even complained that they've gone into organizations on more than one occasion, told board members, wrote them about what needs to be done. And then when they go back again, it's not done. And then, of course, the board tries to give them some flaky reason for why it was not done. Okay. So yes, that culture of doing things right, doing things properly, being ethical and honest and exercising integrity, it has to start at the top. Otherwise, if you don't have the board acting properly, then you're going to start having employees acting improperly, and before you know it, your organization will be compromised. And you need only Google a couple of entities, financial institutions, and others to find out what the results of being compromised are all about. You lose money, you lose licenses, you lose reputation. Okay? So yeah, that culture of compliance is absolutely crucial. All right. So there you have it. A little snapshot, hopefully, I think, maybe of some of the things you've already discussed along the way. I just wanted to make sure we solidify those things in your mind so that when the examinations and the papers and all that stuff are done, and you walk away with some very fundamental things that you can execute on demand in the event that you are required to do so. All right. Any questions before we go any further? All right, so what is Unit 6 going to be all about? Well, Unit 6 is going to talk about a couple of things to roll out the end of this session. We're going to talk about why we should centralize GRC. Within organizations, there are going to be a couple of case studies with some very famous companies that we will read through and discuss. Lehman Brothers, Royal Bank of Scotland, very famous companies that did some interesting things from a compliance perspective, from a GRC perspective. The social responsibility, for some reason, part of the GRC is now social responsibility of companies. We're going to see what that's all about. More talk about risk management and governance, and certainly a little discussion on the all-important issue of conflicts of interest, which of course many persons are currently and constantly engaged in. Some know that they are and still don't care because money is a driving factor. Some persons are involved in conflict of interest issues, and oftentimes, God forbid, they may not even be aware that they're involved in conflict of interest issues. What is a conflict of interest anyway? Does anybody know? Just for the record, what is a conflict of interest?
I would say a conflict of interest is anything that may cause you to question your integrity or your ethics. So you may be carrying out a particular task, knowing that you may possibly be compromised in carrying it out, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that's getting warm. Can you think of an example that might create a conflict of interest? Can you think of one? Doesn't have to be in a financial institution. It can just be in general. Has anybody ever been involved in a conflict of interest? No?
One example would be if you work in a bank and you perform your own transaction or family members transaction.
Yeah, if you're doing some transaction for a family member that you know does not conform with your company's policy and procedures, that would create a conflict of interest. What about hiring a family member? Is that a conflict of interest? Let's say
It could be. It could be.
it could be, yeah, it could be.
I don't know if
Depending
it's straight up conflict. It really depends on whether or not you have to be working in tandem with the person, or you could be working in separate departments or not performing roles that particularly coincide with each other. So that don't necessarily mean a conflict.
yeah, if you can somehow find yourself in situations where jobs do not conflict and create a problem in terms of the operational and compliance capacity of the organization, doesn't create any risk issues, then perhaps it may not be considered a big problem. It might be considered a conflict, but not necessarily a problem that the organization cannot overcome, all things being equal.
Mr. Wilkinson, I have a question in that regard. You asked that. What if it's a family-run business?
Well, that's a different matter. If it's a family-run business, then no, you can hire as many family members as you like. Some people would not suggest you do that because too many family members can spoil the broth. But of course, who can tell a family-run business how many family members to hire? By all means. I'll say this: a lot of people have said in the past that they don't like working for family-run businesses, not because it's a conflict of interest. Can anybody think of why people may not want to work for a family-run business? Why would somebody not want to work for a family-run business? Well, if you work for a family-run business, what are your chances for promotion?
Really slim.
Yeah, depending on what family business that is, it could be pretty slim. Which, for example, in other words, once you get to a certain level, all those jobs above that level are going to be held by family members potentially, not necessarily, just potentially. Okay, and so yeah, that could be a problem, but it's not necessarily a conflict of interest if it's a family-run business. What about a conflict at the board level? What can create a conflict at the board level?
I guess if a board member holds a board position, but they may also hold some managerial position in the company, like senior management.
Potentially. So now sometimes we have senior, like for example, the CEO might be what we call an executive director. So he's an executive of the firm, so he sits on the board. That is not directly considered a conflict of interest. But depending on what the CEO's behavior is all about as he conducts his job, it could become a situation where there might be a potential conflict of interest. What about if a board member is sitting on one board and is sitting on the board of another company that's competing with the other board that he's sitting on? Is that a conflict? So
Yes.
yeah, you're sitting on A board and you're sitting on B board, and A and B are competitors. That could be a problem. Okay, because who are you going to be loyal to, A or B? It can clearly create a problem. All right, and so the discussion on conflict of interest will clearly be talking about some of these things so that those of you who are already out there can understand what these conflicts are. And one day, if you find yourself in these situations, you'll be able to recognize them. That's the whole idea. And then decide if it's really a conflict. And if it is, how do I get out of it? And if it isn't a conflict, fine, I can continue forward. All right. So those are some of the things that we're going to see in Unit 6, situations and case studies. Okay, does everybody have their notes for Unit 6? Everybody has the notes for Unit 6? Sorry, yes or no?
I mean, if you have the textbook, you have the text.
Okay, so then turn to Unit 6, all the way back to the back, I believe, somewhere. If I haven't said it before, and I may have said it the last time, as far as my sessions are concerned, I like to keep them open and interactive. That means that you can interrupt me at any time if you have any questions, or if you want to tell a story about Jack and the Glory, or anything that's going on in your organization or elsewhere in the world. Please feel free to raise them at any time during my lecture. I really don't have a problem with it. Just start talking. Like, I have a question, or I need to say something, or I have a story to say. Please feel free to do that. Okay? That's part and parcel of why we're here. Okay? If you work in an environment and we're talking about a particular concept that seems to apply to your environment, and you have a question or a concern about it, please feel free to raise it. You don't necessarily have to give any names if you don't want to, but certainly any scenarios that you give will be a kind of case study topology for us to discuss, or at least give feedback to each other, and maybe learn a few tips about the kinds of things that other people, different people in the classroom might be experiencing. So that's the whole idea. All right. And of course, we have 4 sessions tonight and then 3 more. So we're going to be yip-yapping about situations and cases for a little while. As I said, we'll probably be looking at discussing the case assignment in our final session, but don't let that stop you from raising questions, okay, about the assignment number 3. If you have a question or questions you'd like to raise even before we get to the end to discuss it, please feel free to do that, okay, by all means. When is your assignment 3 due? Anybody?
12th of July.
How far away is that from now?
Mommy. 6.5 weeks.
Yes, right around the corner. I know 6.5 weeks sounds like a long time, but it's not. Okay, so I encourage everybody to please get started. Don't wait until the last minute for these bloody Brits paper. They are very meticulous. As I mentioned the last time, you've probably seen some of that in your assignment too. I know you have word limits and all that, but they still expect details despite the word limits. And so you have to be crisp and to the point without leaving out any important stuff. So don't wait until the last minute. Start early, like this weekend or something. And every week, every day, do a little at a time so that as you get closer to the 12th, you'll just be cruising along, rereading it, having somebody read it and critiquing it, that sort of thing, making sure that you have it crisp and that you're not stressing a day or two before the final date to try and come up with a crisp paper. That never works well. Okay? All right, so yes, interrupt me at any time. That's part and parcel of why we're here. All right, so situations and case studies. What is the story? Interestingly enough, this particular unit opens up with a definition of GRC, no less. So there's no getting away from this acronym GRC. If you're in compliance, it'll follow you everywhere. You need to make sure you make it follow you everywhere. And again, the other thing that may or may not have been mentioned to you is that compliance doesn't only apply to financial institutions. Other organizations have compliance issues as well. For example, if you work for an oil company, there might be certain compliance requirements that have to be met. For example, bad oil has to be properly stored and not thrown in the ocean. It has to be dispersed up some other way. Those companies that are throwing bad stuff in the ocean, they obviously are not compliant with most international and local requirements. And so the issue of compliance is not confined to financial institutions. For the most part in our discussions, yes, but there are compliance issues everywhere. Okay? Compliance issues have arisen very recently with this vaccine that we're taking around the world, that the whole world must be, well, in the Bible, they says the whole world must be taxed. Now the whole world must be vaccinated. And of course, it's gotten to a point now where if you're not vaccinated and you're considered somebody who has leprosy for some reason. But what is interesting about the whole vaccine process is the compliance process. Did it meet all of the compliance protocols for a vaccine? The jury is still out. One half of the world is saying, yes, it has. The other half of the world is saying, no, it has not. And so it's an interesting situation in a non-financial environment with the discussion of compliance. Who is compliant and who is not? Did the makers of the vaccines meet all of the compliance protocols? And if they did, who verified those compliance protocols, like the regulators? Did somebody go in and verify the things that they said? Well, the central bank and securities commissions, they come in, they check your records, they look things over, they ask you questions because they're seeking to verify, to make sure that you're compliant. Well, is the vaccine meeting those compliance standards? We don't know for sure. What we do know is some persons are saying, yes, it's compliant. Other persons are saying, no. All right, interesting compliance issues, very current event. All right, so no less than the Open Compliance and Ethics Group, OECG. Notice there's an interesting word that comes up with compliance, and that word is called ethics. And the reason why ethics keeps showing up in the vicinity of compliance, because it is believed that we can hardly be totally and properly compliant without being significantly ethical in what we do. In other words, it's hard to be unethical and say, but nevertheless, I'm compliant. Very unlikely. Some people still attempt to do that in organizations, but those two things have to be in agreement. They cannot be what we call incongruent, because it creates a contradiction. If you're compliant, you're deemed to be ethical. If you're ethical, for the most part, you're deemed to be seeking to be compliant. Okay? So this group comes up with a great definition of GRC. So if you didn't really get the definition of GRC before, now in Unit 6, all the way down to the end, we see a definition of GRC again. Now, let me ask you, have you seen a definition of GRC before now? Anyone? Yes, no? Have you seen a definition of GRC before now? Can you guys still hear me? Hello, testing, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I didn't hear any response come back. Has anybody ever seen a definition of GRC before today? Earlier in your text, one of the previous units? No?
Yeah, one of the previous units had it.
I would think so. Okay. Now, one of the questions that I've had from students in previous sessions is, how do we apply the definition of GRC when we're doing our assignments? Well, some assignments might require that you just open your assignment with a definition of GRC. If you have such a question that a clear definition of GRC will work, then this definition and others will be a great tool to open up your assignment response with. Okay? Outside of that, you might even get a question at some point that gives you the definition of GRC and then ask you to dissect its components, discuss. For example, the Open Compliance and Ethics Group describes GRC as, and then we have this definition, and then the question might be discuss, full stop. And then you have to now go into this definition and tear it to pieces and apply all of the concepts and skills that you learned throughout the session, the period, to try to fit them into the various components of the definition of GRC. Okay? So I'm just kind of throwing that out so you can be thinking about things like that. So let us first look at the definition. I'm sure there's a reason why we open up Unit 6 with it. It probably creates a foundation for a whole lot of other things we'll be discussing in Unit 6. All right, so GRC then is defined as a system of people. That's you guys. Processes, that's what you do, and technology that enables an organization to understand and prioritize stakeholder expectations, comma. Now, first question. Who is a stakeholder in an organization? Anyone?
The employees, the shareholders.
Yes, these are all stakeholders. Why do we call them stakeholders?
I guess because they all are involved in the organization in some way, shape, or form.
True. Not only are they involved, but they all have different specific interests, self-interests. For example, why would the shareholders have a stake in how well the organization performs?
Profit.
Why?
Profits.
Yeah,
So they need to make money, so that's their profit.
yeah, shareholders are the owners of the company. They put money in the company for only two reasons. One, for dividends. Where do dividends come from? Profits. That's the first reason that shareholders put money into a company. They are the owners. The second reason they put money into a company is because they want the company to do well. In other words, maintain its profitability, and as such, cause the value of the shares to increase, or what we call appreciate. Okay? And so that's what shareholders have an interest in terms of being stakeholders. What is the interest of employees? Why are you guys interested if you're an employee? What's your stake?
Job stability, jobs and stability.
Salary.
Yeah, job stability for sure. Are we going to be here for a long time, or one day we're going to get up and somebody tells us the company no longer exists? Okay, happens all the time. A lot of people get up to companies that no longer exist, past and present. Okay, so yeah, employees have a stake in that. Salary, of course. As long as companies do well, you can expect to get your existing salary. And if they continue to do even better, depending on what organization you work for, you can expect to get salary increases. Okay? And so, yeah, employees definitely have a stake. Who else has a stake?
I guess the regulators too.
Of course. What is their stake?
A stable industry.
Of course, a stable financial and other industry. Stability in the industries means stability in the country. And so regulators' primary function is to try to sustain and get organizations to maintain that posture. By all means. Does the government have a stake? Are they stakeholders?
Certainly, they receive taxes and fees, so they would definitely have a stake.
Yeah, they receive taxes and fees. Not only they receive them, they want it on time too. And so it's important that organizations continue to make money so that they can meet their commitments to the government to pay taxes and fees and any other levies that might be promulgated against them by the government in order to raise money. So this definition that opens up with a system of people, processes, and technology that what enables an organization to understand and prioritize stakeholder expectations. Because all of these stakeholders we just talked about, they all have their own personal priorities and they don't care about the other person. The shareholder doesn't necessarily care about the employee. They do care, but they don't care. They care, well, maybe secondary. Their primary care is dividends from profits, appreciation, and share values. The government's concern is, are you continuing to make money to pay me my taxes? The employee's concern is, I don't care what the shareholder's concern is, particularly as long as this job is stable and I can get my salary, and God forbid, and even an increase from time to time. Okay? So it's important then for GRC to work from that perspective alone. Instead of a comma, we can actually put a full stop and just be hang there for a while. Okay? But GRC goes further. Comma, set business objectives that are congruent with the values and risks. Achieve objectives while optimizing risk profit profile and protecting value, comma, operate within legal, contractual, internal, social, and ethical boundaries, comma, provide relevant, reliable, and timely information to appropriate stakeholders, and enable the measurement of performance and effectiveness of the system. It's a pretty big job, pretty big definition. pretty big expectation by GRC. Okay? But for better or for worse, that long-winded definition for GRC is what it is. And as you can see from the relentless words that are used, that there's a great expectation. Prioritize the shareholder expectations. Set business objectives for the future that are consistent with values and risks. In other words, take risks, but don't take unnecessary risks. Do not undermine the values of those stakeholders who are relying on that organization. Whatever your objectives are, achieve them. Keep your risk profile reasonable. Protect the values of the firm. All of these are designed for continuing the organization as an entity and making sure that everything is working the way it should, so that all persons, entities, and others who have a stake in that organization can benefit. Do not ignore legal and contractual issues. Make sure the internal controls and issues are in place. Do not forget your social responsibility and your ethical boundaries. Do not do unethical stuff. That's what it means. If you're thinking about doing something wicked or crooked, don't do it. That's what it means. Okay? And then provide relevant, reliable, and timely information. Do not mislead stakeholders. Do not lie. Do not give information too late whereby the stakeholders cannot use it. It is no longer appropriate or relevant to what they want to do. Big definition is GRC. Okay? And at the end of the day, make sure that we can measure the performance of the organization and its effectiveness. Okay? Now, whether you learn that word for word, for some of you, that might be a piece of cake. You have a cake, you have a photographic memory. Fine. For others, you may not have a photographic memory, but certainly once you can recall the key aspects of the definition, you should be good. It is something to keep in mind in whatever organization you work for. Remember, even if it's not a financial institution, compliance and ethical issues are always relevant to the organization. If you're a regulator, compliance and ethical issues are still relevant to you as a regulator, because some regulators are corrupt. Some regulators take bribes. Did you know that? Does anybody in this room know any regulators who take bribes? If the answer is no, you can say no. Do you know anybody?
No.
No. Okay. If you did know someone, would you say it?
Probably would have to report it.
Would you report it?
Yes.
Yes, you should. Do we all report them? No, we don't. Why don't we do it? Well, we all have our own, personal reasons again. Okay. Some people report it because they are ethical. They want to follow the GRC definition to the T. They don't want to do anything to put the stakeholders' interests in jeopardy. They want to protect the reputation of their organizations. They want to protect their own reputations. So those are some of the reasons why they do. But on the other hand, we always have persons who don't. And their reason is, anybody know what would be one reason? Starts with M. M? What would be one reason why somebody, what would be one reason why somebody would not report some unethical situation that they come upon?
Dinero.
Dinero. Okay, better known as money. People do all sorts of strange stuff for money. I can only say the textbooks requires you to be ethical in your dealings. That certainly involves all money issues that are illegal, unethical, and so on. We have to be strong enough to know when somebody's offering us a bribe, somebody's trying to get us to get involved in some defrauding issue and so on. It's very important for us to know that so we don't find ourselves and put our organizations in jeopardy. So the unit 6 is about situations. It's easy to see why we start off with a definition of GRC by the ethics group. Because if we don't follow this definition in one form or another, we could find ourselves in a situation. And certainly, if we're caught for the wrong stuff, we can certainly become a case study, like so many other case study and topologies that have come about because of wrongdoing. Okay? So something to keep in mind. All right, so I've talked enough for the moment. I need somebody to get it on with us. Do the good reading. Okay, who's going to be my first victim? I'll just start at the top. Linnell, you're at the top of my list. Are you there?
Let me say, Shane on.
Give it, give it your best shot. Anyway.
Where do you want me to start from, Mr. Wilkinson?
Start with the group defines effective GRC as.
Okay. The group defines effective GRC as integration of GRC disciplines, integration of GRC activities across risk categories and departments, integration of GRC activities with business processes, and integration to provide a single version of the truth.
Now,
When
Linnell, stick a pin for a minute.
Mhm.
Folks, in that group definition for GRC, what word stands out immediately?
Me single version of the truth. So that is that side, my side, and the next person's side. Three sides to one.
That's not what I was thinking, but I'm happy that you said that your focus went right to some version of the truth. In this case, a single version, which is supposed to be the correct version. But that is critical. And the fact that it's the fourth point doesn't make it any less important to the other three to which it's subordinated. But the key word that jumped out at me in those 4 points that you read is integration. Do you see that?
Mhm.
Now, does anybody know what integration means?
Interworking, intertwining, coming together.
Yeah, bringing stuff together. So this whole thing about in order for GRC to be effective, there has to be a certain amount of coming together. Okay, disciplines have to be integrated. Risk issues have to be integrated with departments. In other words, everybody can't be on their own playing field doing what they feel like doing. It has to be integrated if it's going to work. If GRC is going to work efficiently, there has to be integration going on. We cannot have any islands. The organization has to come together as a unit to make things work. Okay? And certainly coming to some decision about the single version of the truth is probably going to be one of the most difficult things for some organizations, because some organizations have all kinds of versions of the truth depending on what is being discussed or depending on what is discovered by regulators and others. All right, keep going.
When making a business case for GRC within an organization or firm from a cost/benefit perspective, the most fundamental question to be answered is whether or not GRC mechanisms are worth the investment. First question, before we proceed further with this section, what do you consider are the most important benefits of GRC in your company or organization? Make brief notes.
Go ahead.
Make brief notes, and then after you've finished this section, review your initial thoughts.
Okay.
Depending on,
Stick a pin in now.
sorry?
You can,
Okay.
you can make your notes as you go. But my question is this question. What do you consider are the most important benefits? Can you think of one? let's start there. Can anybody think of one benefit of GRC in your company before she goes on?
It may prevent you from being involved in some criminal activity.
Absolutely. Like what? Can you think of an example?
Money laundering.
Money laundering. In other words, if somebody comes in with a $30,000 deposit and you're a teller, what should you do?
Well, from the banking perspective, I'm assuming they should require some extra information on the source of the funds.
Indeed.
I don't know, the bank may have a particular form or something that may need to be filled out and whatever extra protocols may need to take place, but along those lines. I don't know if I-
Of course, somebody coming in to open a new account, they have $30,000. What do? Well, if your GRC is working, you should have a KYC program in place, know your customer, which means that you're required to get personal information from the customer, like passport copies, proof of where they live, and all this kind of stuff. And and equally as important, you depositing $30,000, where did it come from? That question alone, if they can't answer that question, you probably have a problem. You have a GRC problem right off the top. All right. So whatever policies and procedures that might exist in your company for GRC purposes, they are there to help you to protect yourself and to protect your organization. Okay? And any one of them that you can identify in the organizations you work for that does that means that your GRC is of great benefit to you and to your organization. Something to keep in mind, because depending on where you work, sometimes you run into these GRC ethical issues, and then you have to decide how far am I going to go? Am I going to let this slide? If they offer me a bribe, shall I take it and then process it, or should I turn it away? Should I report the matter or not? Okay. These are decisions that usually policies and procedures require us to do, but whether or not an employee does this, and when I say employee, I mean from the board all the way down. They're all employees, senior, middle management, and junior, but they're all employees. And as far as ethics and good governance is concerned, good GRC, everybody has that responsibility from the board all the way down to the janitor, and from the janitress all the way up to the board. No question, no ifs, ands, and buts. Some people, depending on their status in the organization, might get you to think that they're not subject to GRC rules. If you run into such a person, you probably need to report that as a suspicious transaction, because everybody in the organization is subject to GRC rules. God forbid you run into an employee who thinks otherwise. All right, keep going now.
All right, depending on the sector and business you work in, there may be complexities in processes, client market, sectors, and jurisdictions, all of which raise distinct challenges to the achievement of targets. GRC strategies can help to manage these challenges, which are broadly segmented into business and regulatory challenges. No firm or organization is static. It will have evolved from the business, it will have evolved from the business it was 5, 10, or even 20 years ago, become more complex, or become more active in different markets from those previously. Therefore, its exposure to the external environment itself has evolved and changed in response to increased regulation and legislation.
Thank you very much, Danelle. Fantastic. Thank you for getting the ball rolling. Now I can comfortably pick on somebody else until it's your turn again. All right. So this GRC thing, then, it's no wonder we open up our discussion about situations, because GRC opens a bag of worms, if you haven't seen that in the last 15 minutes already. And this bag of worms has a very imperative nature. And those of us who work in financial institutions, in compliance, in regulation of any kind, have to be constantly aware of the demands and the requirements of the GRC. Okay? And so we're constantly looking at circumstances where GRC is lacking and where it can be improved, depending on the sector we're in, the business we're in, jurisdictions, whatever the case might be. These challenges are going to come up. And so we need to be prepared as organizations to meet those challenges. And sometimes from an ethical perspective alone, the challenge can be great. But people are offering thousands and in some cases millions of dollars for us to be unethical in our jobs. It's something to think about in terms of how we as individual employees from the top to the bottom go about carrying out our GRC requirements. Notice we are told that GRC strategies do not occur in a vacuum, right? They either occur in a business environment and or a regulatory environment. So whether you're in business or whether you're in the regulatory environment, we do have to deal with these issues. Okay? The fact that organizations are not static, static means it doesn't stay in one place, it changes, it evolves, okay, over time. And so do our GRC practices. As time goes on, we're supposed to get better at our GRC practices. We all understand that a new firm might have issues with GRC practices. But as you get older, you're supposed to be doing things better, you're supposed to be more ethical, and therefore not be subject to the ills of non-compliance. Okay? Unfortunately, we've seen in recent times that many seasoned old firms have still fallen prey to money, possessions, stuff. Even audit firms have been found to be acting unethically, and in some cases, some of them have had to close their doors. Not too many of them, but a couple, and many more have been accused of not being ethical in their auditing practices, all because some firm that they audited put them in a conflict of interest position by saying, if you find anything that can hurt the firm in your audit, please advise senior management, tell us. And if we ask you not to disclose it in your audit report and you don't, then we can guarantee that we'll call you back next year for another $10 million audit, depending on the size of the firm. Unfortunately, for some auditing firms, that is very enticing. And all GRC and audit requirements and ethics and all that stuff can go out of the door in a flying minute because of the influence of money. And so one of the things we have to be careful with when it comes to compliance issues and GRC issues is to make sure that we stay away from conflict of interest issues, that we stay away from monetary issues, bribes and frauds, and all this kind of stuff, because they are the primary reasons why a lot of us end up and our organizations in trouble. All right, thank you very much, Lanelle. Okay, Chanel, why don't you pick it up? Navigating all these.
Yes. Navigating all these challenges requires a structured approach to GRC and a move away from manual, ad hoc, and reactive methodologies that may have been sufficient previously. Without GRC mechanisms, and here, mechanisms includes policies and procedures, IT systems and processes, accountabilities and responsibilities, lines of communication, etc. The business environment could be too diverse for effective control. This diversity includes an understanding of what risk assessment and monitoring means, an understanding of the common but basic terminology like the aforementioned risk assessment and monitoring, audit, etc., and a firm grasp of the many methods and practices for achieving the same goals.
Okay, stick a pin, Chanel. Now, I don't know if that paragraph bears heavily on anybody other than your lecturer today, but included in that very small paragraph that she read are some heavy artillery. Okay. For example, the word navigating implies something. Who knows what navigating implies?
To wade through something. To
Yeah,
wade through something, to
wade through, to maneuver, to work our way through and around. Aren't we all navigating when we go to work every day, like navigating through something? True or false?
yes.
Yes. Whether we are aware of it or not, whether we admit it or not, we are constantly navigating. And so in this particular context, these challenges that we saw earlier in GRC challenges that Linnell mentioned, we're constantly navigating through them. I noticed we had told that in order to be successful with GRC, we have to be structured. We can't be willy-nilly, whatever buck up goes. I'm honest today and dishonest tomorrow. I'm ethical on Sunday when I go to church, and on Monday, the hell with ethics. I'll do whatever I feel like because. Okay? Doesn't work that way. If GRC is going to be truly effective, then our approach to it has to be structured. Okay? Notice we are being asked to move away from ad hoc and reactive methods. What does ad hoc mean? On the spur of the moment stuff. Whatever buck up goes, wing it. I'll react after it happens. I don't have time to think about what might happen. Okay? And so if we are doing any of those things, we're not going to do GRC very well. Governance risk and compliance stuff is not going to work very well if it's not structured. Okay? If it worked in a smaller firm, if it worked where you worked previously and all that stuff, maybe. But I can assure you, as you move to larger firms and as organizations and regulatory requirements and legislation becomes more and more sophisticated, we have to move away from ad hoc and reactive to a more structured approach. What is likely to happen? What do we expect to do as an organization-wide entity? Are we communicating all this information to all those who need to know? Or are we just saying to certain people and other people are in the dark? Right? Stuff like this not going to work very well for an effective GRC. Okay? And notice we are told that without these GRC mechanisms, and here we're told mechanism includes what? Written policies and procedures, proper IT systems and processes, and accountabilities and responsibilities, and lines of communication and all that stuff by the top management, senior management, board level persons, all the way down throughout the organization. If all of these things are not working in tandem, meaning together, we're going to have GRC problems. We're going to have GRC failures. And one of the reasons why a lot of organizations continue to fail regulatory inspections, for example, here and around the world, is because they wouldn't tighten up their GRC programs. Does that mean you're going to get everything right all the time? Hell no. That's not what it means. It just means that every day you seek to do it better each time. And then over time, you have a GRC system that works pretty well. That's the whole idea. Okay? And of course, somebody mentioned risk assessment about an hour ago, and here we are. GRC requires an understanding of what risk assessment and monitoring means. Back in the saddle. Okay? And there's certain terminology you'll find will always be showing up because they are an inherent part of the GRC process, period. I think that's one of the reasons why they refer to this unit as situations. And we throw in some cases to see how situations occur. Because if you haven't been in situations yet in your life, you will be in situations. And the more information you have about how to deal with those situations, and in this case, GRC issues, the better you will function in that environment. Okay? All right. And so Chanel, what is the question?
Question: if you critically evaluate the GRC mechanisms in your firm or organization, do you identify areas of diversity in understanding or practice? Or are you confident that standard terminologies and measurements are in place?
Okay. Now you guys don't have to answer the question now, but the reason why I asked you to read it is so that you can be thinking about it in terms of not only the context of your academia, but also in the context of the environment where you work. Because whether you believe it or not, even if you don't work for a financial institution, you might be working for one leader or even a regulator of some kind. And even if you don't work for a financial institution or a regulator, other organizations do have compliance requirements that may not necessarily be central bank or SCB directed, but they are nevertheless compliance requirements, which require the same GRC standards that we're talking about in terms of proper ethics and a structured approach to getting things done. Usually a structured approach is basically a consistent way of doing things that everybody's basically aware of, and that nobody is trying to hanky-pank at the expense of the organization. Okay, hanky-pank. All right, keep going, Chanel.
This diversity of understanding is a risk, but one which is not necessarily identified by firms and other organizations. Improving GRC and risk management processes. Post-credit crisis, it is critical from a regulator's perspective that regulated entities have rigorous processes in place to identify, understand, control, remediate, and monitor compliance and risk management approaches. Centralization of certain GRC controls offers advantages because it provides an oversight and control that is difficult to achieve in diverse, decentralized organizations.
Take a pinch, Chanel, before we go on. Is there anybody in this room who is not familiar with the term centralization? Okay. I'm sure, does anybody have access to a phone in this room? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Somebody answered. Who was that? Was that LaTroy or Akobe?
Akobe.
Akobe, do you have your phone in front of you?
Next to me.
Great. Can you Google the word centralization for us?
1 second.
Okay, that's okay, we'll wait.
Yes.
Okay, what does Google say it is?
The concentration of control of an activity or organization under a single authority.
Yes, thank you very much. Control under a single authority. In other words, if something is decentralized, it means it's scattered and decisions are being made from all angles. And usually, while decentralization has certain benefits in other kinds of environments, and as far as GRC is concerned, the more centralized it is, the more effective it can be. If too many people are changing the rules as they see fit, applying the rules as they see fit, making up rules along the way, and all this kind of stuff, in their opinion, that's kind of like decentralizing GRC. And that's not the structured approach that we're looking for, that we saw a bit earlier. And I'm hoping that I'm making these connections for you so that you can see that the stuff that you're studying is not in isolation, it's all interconnected. Because we saw structured earlier when Chanel started reading that we require a structured approach. And now we're saying That structured approach is better applied from a centralized perspective as opposed to a decentralized perspective. Now, after ACOB's definition of centralization, we can understand hopefully a little bit better why the structured approach to GRC is better from a central point, because everything comes from one location. Everybody is on the same page, and we're not going to and fro dealing with all kinds of different programs, opinions, and communications. Nothing can hurt an organization more when important information is coming from different angles, from different perspectives. All right, keep going, Chanel.
Centralization of solutions also allows the business to address the widest possible range of external regulatory and legislative standards. And in the case of multinational operations, this offers considerable cost efficiencies by deduplicating activities. A single mechanism leads to a better understanding of the organization's risk profile and consequently other elements of the GRC mechanism. In this case, compliance activities have more time available for analysis and problem solving and for contributing to wider strategic decisions.
Okay.
GRC technology, sometimes now referred to as RegTech, has a role to play. Interpretation of data, number crunching is viewed as a clerical task in some circles and is one that can be automated so that compliance teams can concentrate on analysis of the information, outputs, and engagement with internal and external stakeholders. This engagement not only facilitates effective remediation, but prevention and control of risks throughout the organization.
Okay, before you go to the question, let's say something about technology. We saw the ethics, we saw the structure, we saw the centralization. These are all important elements of effective GRC systems. And so now we're down to technology. How does technology help with GRC? Well, in the old days, we used our Excel and our manual systems to do our number crunching. And so compliance people spend a lot of time crunching numbers and data and statistics and all this kind of stuff, as well as trying to do the compliance work. Because of the modern technology that we have, a lot of this number crunching and statistical information and raw data can be done by computer systems. And of course, clearly, with the computer working faster, quicker, and more accurately, we now have more time as compliance and MLRO people and regulatory people and senior management people and everybody else in the organization to focus on other important issues outside of crunching numbers. Okay? We can have more discussions about how to improve GRC processes, how to upgrade our policies and procedures, how to make things work more effectively in the organization, how to get top management to start acting as if they're interested in the future of the firm, how to get senior executive management to stop behaving in their own self-interest and start working towards the organization as a whole. And all these kinds of things we now have time to do because IT and some other people are crunching numbers using software that is now available. That has been a huge step in structuring GRCs. And as a result of technology, we've been able to get a whole lot of things done. Not only that, technology allows GRC persons to get information back faster and more accurately. And therefore, we can then make critical decisions on a more efficient basis. Okay, so all this stuff about being structured, being centralized, and using technology, these are all critical elements. Any organization that wants to improve its GRC needs to be thinking about these things that we have already discussed in situations in Unit 6. I mean, we're just on the second page, I think, and all of a sudden we have covered a whole host of things that need and could be done to improve GRCs in just about any organization, many of which, by the way, can do well to adopt some of these concepts already. All right, so what is the question?
Question, apart from the benefits described above, can you think of other benefits for the organization or firm from centralizing GRC processes and methodologies?
Okay, can somebody think of just one other benefit from having GRC in a centralized area, everything coming from one place, one location, one decision-making base? Can you think of one other benefit? Anyone? Take a
If it's
risk.
centralized, then you'd probably be able to deal with training more effectively.
Absolutely. Thank you very
Centralized
much.
system, I mean,
Yeah, excellent. The training program, if it's centralized, you can come up with what the training is going to be. The training will then be consistent throughout the organization, and therefore it makes it far more effective as a whole. That's an excellent, excellent point, which many organizations would do well to think about even today. Okay, if training is too decentralized, see why we need to know the differences between these things. If it's too decentralized, then everybody will be doing their own what? Thing. Has anybody ever been in a situation where everybody was doing their own thing and things got pretty messed up? Anybody? Well, if you have not,
when you go into certain places in this country trying to get certain
okay,
things
now,
done, depending on which you signed up before,
yes,
they will tell you this, these are the requirements necessary. And then you end up before another person and they tell you different, so it frustrates the process.
thank you, thank you, thank you. A very simple example of a very serious situation, because that simple example that she gave can lead to horrendous kinds of problems and inefficiencies and damage, depending on the ultimate outcome. Okay? Yes, thank you very much. As a matter of fact, I had a situation not too long ago where, speaking about this kind of situation where my son who's in Canada, he went to the driving location to get his driver's license to do the test. So they said to him, "Oh, Mr. Wilkinson, you need to have a letter from Nassau Road Traffic saying how long you've been driving in total." Okay. So he harasses me again. "Dad, I need the letter." I'm like, "Son, I don't want to go down there. I hate road traffic." He said, "I know, but I need the letter they say." I'm like, "Okay. Since you're my baby, I'll go down to road traffic, but that's the only bloody reason." So I go down there and wait forever, fought with them as usual, until somebody finally came out and said, "Oh, great, leave it, come back in a week." I'm like, "This only take 1 minute. It's only one paragraph. Dante Wilkins been driving for?" They said, "I'm sorry, come back in a week." And she turned around and left. Me, standing there. So I return in a week. Is the document ready? After about 15 minutes, she comes out, "It's ready. Here it is." So instinctively, I look at the document to see if everything was in order. Would you believe that in the document where the number should have been 2 years, she had 1 year? Can you believe that? So I said, "Ma'am, this says 1 year, it should be 2. In that case, come back next week." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" But she was not kidding. And so if I wanted the document, I had to go back. When I finally sent the document to my son, I scanned it. He goes onto traffic in Canada and said, "Here's the letter." What do you think they told him? "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Somebody should have told you we cannot use a scanned copy. You need to have the original letter with the original signature." Well, I don't need to go any further on that. I just kind of use that example to remind you, because I'm sure most of you have had some version of some nonsense, how if things are not properly structured, it can create a bloody nightmare for companies, for employees, for stakeholders, for individuals, for governments, for whoever is impacted by it. Okay? Something to think about. So this stuff is, we're not just talking about centralization, structure, technology, and all that stuff, because we're just trying to get through a course. This stuff is real and should exist in the real world. Interestingly enough, the real world doesn't always embrace the stuff that we're talking about. And if you're bold enough one day to try to implement some of it, do not be surprised if you still meet with resistance. Even though technically, these are the things that we should be aspiring to do. These are the things that regulators try to get entities to do when they come in to do inspections. Some try to comply and others don't.
Mr. Wilkinson, I have a comment
Yeah.
not really a question, but for instance, you have in banking where you have multiple branches, and you may have such structure, and you may have a centralized compliance area, training, everything is centralized. But when it comes down to each branch managing their own branch, and they interpret certain policies differently, or they take it a step further than what it should be, then you have a situation where they then become doing their own thing in terms of, one branch may do one thing versus another branch. And like I think Linnell was saying, frustrates the customer, but the company as a whole may have these structured policies or a way that things should be done. But still, it's almost like the branches become decentralized in a way.
Yes.
Based on how they interpret those policies.
Absolutely. I couldn't think of a better example myself. That is an excellent example of how things that should be going one way can easily end up going the other way. It is a very common problem in branches. It is a very common problem in extended government entities. It is a very common problem in companies that have subsidiaries around the world in different jurisdictions, etc. So yeah.
Mr. Wilkinson, that goes back to my point when I talk about training. That's the importance of training. So if training is centralized, we shouldn't have an issue with branches, if you use a commercial bank, having different requirements. We shouldn't have issues with when you go to a government agency where they have all the staff working at the window, but different people processing applications in particular for maybe say a passport. I should not go to the window and be told by one person that this is what is required of me, and someone else come behind me and go to a different person and there is a different requirement. If everybody is properly trained on what they're supposed to do, we would not have that issue.
And therein lies the problem. First of all too often training programs are not centralized. Secondly, all too often training programs are not effectively structured so that we do not have those kinds of problems. Because a lot of times when training is conducted by organizations, especially those that have branches and subsidiaries and extensions, they're so concerned about just carrying out the act of conducting training. Nobody looks at going back to monitor the training process. And just like KYC and getting to know your customer, and then after they come on board, you have to monitor them to make sure that they're continue to do everything right. Effective training programs are supposed to be designed that way as well, so that you not only provide training, but you do have a mechanism in place, whether it's internal audit or otherwise, whose job it is to make sure that the training concepts remains consistent. Everybody's is on the same page. And certainly in those organizations where people stray, whether deliberately or not, there has to be some mechanism in place to correct it, or to penalize those persons who deliberately violate the requirements. Because, you know, we do have some persons who run their own program, not because they haven't been trained, but because they've decided that they're going to do their own thing for some other reason or reasons. Okay, so yeah, excellent, excellent, excellent. This is what we're talking about when we talk about structured GRC and using all these tools to help us to structure it. When we use our tools well, like proper training programs from a centralized perspective, and then somebody whose job it is to monitor to make sure that the training is taking effect and people are actually doing what they're supposed to do. Somebody is checking, asking the questions to see if the responses are what the company requires. Whatever the monitoring process is, the better these things are done, the more effectively the training program will be. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations don't take the time for one reason or another, yes, to do this. Okay, and yes, those firms that have branches, those banks and those companies have subsidiaries, people start acting independently of the centralized requirements. They start doing things the way they feel like doing them. And again, if you don't have a mechanism in place to monitor, monitoring is crucial. Monitoring is absolutely crucial. And if you don't have a system in place to monitor, I don't care how good the initial program or structure is, the system is going to fail at certain points. You have to have somebody who's going back to check. You have to have somebody who's going back to check, or some department or group or whatever the case, whether internal or external. Otherwise, the problem will persist. All right. Thank you so much for that feedback. That is absolutely critical stuff that continues to plague organizations of all kinds. Doesn't matter what type of organization it is. Those kinds of things continue to plague organizations, entities. Okay? Battling with that all the time. Those of us who put these things in place and monitor them well enough, we get better results. Those of us who don't, we get horrible results, and we have all kinds of other problems that come out of it as a result. All right, and then finally, Janelle.
Other benefits include standardized risk dashboards with agreed parameters for the severity of the risk faced by the organization. This leads to clarity on where remediation and risk treatment efforts should be focused at a firm-wide level rather than a local or divisional level.
Thank you very much. Pretty much what we were just talking about. That whatever the problems are, just like we have to make sure that we try to do it. Notice the words they use from a firm-wide level, that means from a centralized perspective, as opposed to any divisional level.
Hi, is it only me? I can't hear Mr. Wilkinson.
Sounds like he dropped off.
It's showing he's still there, so I don't know if his mic may be muted, and he didn't realize it was muted. Okay, it looked like he dropped off, so I guess give him a couple minutes to come back in. I see, look, a couple people drop off, so I wonder if it's a light issue too.
Yeah, Nellie, I was just saying the same thing. I don't know what the hell PPL is doing. Excuse my language.
All right, so the other group members are saying that their current is off, so it may likely be that current is off. I don't know if we want to give it maybe another 5 minutes and then probably have to log off.
Okay, Nelly.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, guys, I don't know about y'all, but I'm gonna sign off.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone.
Everyone.
Okay, have a good evening.